Objection sustained. The room unclenched, and I didn't. On my lap sat the box, shoebox length, funeral weight, its seal a red coin burning through my skirt. My son avoided my eyes. His wife gripped his arm like I might lunge for custody of his conscience. Behind me, a cousin whispered, "She still doesn't know." I set both hands on the wood the way you steady a child who's learned the shape of storms. He'd given it to me an hour earlier in the hallway. "Don't open it yet," he said, as if timing were compassion, as if I hadn't lived inside other people's clocks. The seal bore our family crest, two clasped hands pretending to be unity. I nodded because nodding is the safest costume for a woman who wants answers. In our house, protection always sounded almost like a command. The trial moved in careful choreography, objections like gulls, exhibits labeled into submission, a timeline massaged until it forgot itself. Words with teeth, inheritance, undue influence, fiduciary duty, bit the air and left it bleeding. The box pulsed against my knees, an animal trapped in a coffin no one would name. Across the aisle, my daughter held my gaze, the only person who looked at me as more than audience. "After," he mouthed from counsel's table, "after as though truth obeys calendars." I pressed my thumb along the seal and felt it nip me. I left it intact, for now. You want to know how a woman becomes silence? By inches, a hand on the wrist. Later, darling. A chuckle that edits you out. It's complicated. A will discussed in the kitchen while the men take the folder to the study that smells like leather and verdicts. My training began early and was disguised as love. Smile, be gracious. Trust the process. I became a museum of unopened doors. "Recess," the judge said, and the gavel kissed wood. I slipped into the ladies' room, the only sanctuary with locks. A stranger in violet heels dabbed her eyes at the sink. We shared the nod of soldiers from different wars. In the last stall, I set the box on my knees and traced the crest. A hairline crack veined the wax, a red seam threatening to speak. "Not yet," he'd said. "Not yet is how you starve someone who thanks you for crumbs." My thumbnail flirted with the seal until footsteps entered and laughter bounced. I tucked the box into my tote and stared at the graffiti carved into the metal. "Girls like us don't get trials. We get announcements." Back inside, attorneys continued their ballet. My son signed without looking up. He had his father's shoulders and his grandfather's caution. I had a box and the choreography of patience. Each pen stroke felt like a subtraction from me, a ledger I was not allowed to see. The in-laws watched with polite triumph, ask where suspicion began, and I can spool 1,000 threads. The envelope misdelivered with my name replaced by occupant. A holiday toast that sounded like an epitaph. The time I suggested a lawyer and was thanked with a chuckle that called me adorable. Ask when I stopped being manageable, and it was when the judge called lunch and the room emptied like a promise finally leaving. Outside, pigeons patrolled the courthouse steps. I sat beneath a bronze statue of a blindfolded woman and set the box on the bench like introducing two stubborn friends. Hunger and fear. Sun warmed the lid. Who else had touched it? Who else had been told, "Wait"? "You look like you're plotting," the bailiff said. "I'm deciding what kind of woman I am," I answered. She nodded, my phone buzzed. "My daughter. Do you need anything?" I almost typed a different life, then asked for water. She sent a heart. I set the phone face down beside the box and watched light pool on both. Obedience feels safe until it eats you. It wins applause for being easy, then leaves you hungry in rooms where dessert is served only to men who sign with certainty. I had been good for so long that goodness tasted like dust. The seal glowed like a wound that learned to look pretty. Memory tilted. I saw my younger self at my in-laws' table. A folder appeared, white as absolution. "It's all standard," his father said. My questions were folded with the linens. Inclusion turned out to be a room with no windows. Years later, when my husband's heart failed, a choir of acronyms explained grief, while my signature proved I understood nothing but sorrow. The afternoon unspooled like a movie I hadn't chosen. Witnesses rehearsed their truths. My son laughed softly at a lawyer's joke. the sound he'd make when he wanted permission to climb higher than I thought safe. Somewhere between boy and man, someone taught him that power is a secret you don't share with your mother. Maybe that teacher was me with my careful silences. "Adjourned," the bailiff called. Bodies rose, papers flocked. He approached, the man who had given me the box, mouth shaped like patience. "After," he said. "Please trust me." For a second I saw us from above, a woman holding wood and habit, a man holding a script and believing it was love. In the corridor, the light wore honey fatigue. I drove home on a road that knows my secrets by heart. At a red light, the box glowed on the passenger seat like a bruise. I whispered, "I hear you." Home greeted me with practiced indifference. I filled the kettle because ritual is a softer rebellion, and cleared the dining table where our family had been both happiest and cruelest. In the center, I laid the box and drew the curtains. I turned off my phone. Quiet arrived. I traced the seal and let it bite. Small humiliations lined up. The meeting where I took minutes, not opinions. The vacation itinerary that erased me. The time I asked about the estate plan and received a brochure for grief counseling. Every knot now carried a date stamp. I wanted a single now of my own. The kettle clicked off. I didn't pour. I pulled my chair close and set my elbows on either side of the box. "What are you?" I asked. The house answered, "Once I know, I cannot unknow." But ignorance hasn't protected me. It has only made me late to my own life. I slid my thumbnail beneath the wax. It resisted. I pressed harder. The seal scratched and warmed, then yielded with a sigh. Not broken, compromised. My pulse hammered. I paused and listened for the girl I used to be, the one who wrote "I will not be small" and hid the page like contraband. I thought of my daughter's chin lifted in the courtroom. I thought of my son's eyes fixed anywhere but on me. I thought of the judge, the crest, the woman with the braid who guards doors, the stranger in violet heels. Rules pretended to be virtues. Patience cosplayed as grace. Maybe justice isn't blind. Maybe she's tired of pretending. I cracked the curtain an inch. Late light slid across the table and set the wood aglow. In that gold angle, I saw the seam where lid met base, more promise than separation. My decision felt like a door. I stepped through it with my hands. I gripped the sides. The wood warmed, as if the box had waited for someone who intended to hear it. A car door thumped somewhere. The kettle cooled. My name rose in my mind like a drum. Mine, mine, mine. The last thread of wax surrendered with a soft crack. I lifted. The hallway floor settled like a reluctant witness, one of the house's old tricks, and for a heartbeat, I saw every exit. Slide the box into my tote, play the part I've practiced, wait for after to arrive like weather. Be praised for patience until I disappear. I did not sit back down. I remembered the hallway, the wood pressed into my palms, the leash disguised as a lullaby. I remembered my mother saying power meant absorbing, not confronting. I remembered my husband promising he'd handle everything in the morning, and the signatures that turned me into a polite spectator when morning came. My daughter later called that season, "the silence you survived." Surviving is not living. Trouble is the moment you stop being convenient. I slid my fingers beneath the lid's lip and inhaled. The box exhaled the cold breath of paper and glue. My heartbeat arranged itself into language. Enough, enough, enough. The family portrait watched, each smile a stitch. "I am not your seam," I said, and heat rose like courage waking. The hinge hesitated. Metal remembering duty, wood remembering promise. The room narrowed to a hinge and a breath. I thought of the toast, "to loyalty," and how the room laughed as if loyalty were a trick instead of a choice with teeth. I thought of the graffiti in the stall, the emails to occupant, the white folder, the bailiff's braid. My hands did not shake. "Tell me," I said to the seam, to the dark, to the version of me waiting on the other side. "Tell me now." The lid rose a hair's width, then another. Air, old as our myths, brushed my face. The torn seal clicked softly. Somewhere a neighbor laughed. Somewhere my son rehearsed a sentence he could live with. Somewhere my daughter walked home with water I no longer needed. The box gave one last sigh. I lifted the lid. The lid cracked open, and the air changed. A stale, paper-thick breath rose from the box, like a vault unsealing after decades. Inside was not clutter but precision. Manila folders aligned like soldiers, envelopes heavy with confession, photographs curled at the edges as though they had sweated through years of hiding. At the very top lay a letter in my husband's hand. His script was unmistakable, sharp, upright, impatient strokes that never apologized for rushing. I touched it, but my hand retreated. Touching was dangerous. Touching meant believing. I reached again, slower this time, and slid the letter free. The paper rasped against the folder beneath, the sound of something being peeled away from silence. My eyes snagged on the first words. If she is reading this, then they have already betrayed her. The room shrank. I pressed the letter flat with trembling palms. His words moved like fire across the page, warning me about the trial, about the masks our family had perfected. He named names. He explained patterns. He wrote of loyalty tests, disguised as favors, of signatures collected in back rooms while laughter covered the sound of a pen against paper. And then, trust only what you hold in your hand. The rest is theater. The rest was theater. My breath punched out. The courtroom with its polished floors. My son's voice rehearsed into steadiness. The crest sealed in wax. It was all a script. And I was cast as the fool who didn't know the ending. I shuffled through the folders with hands that refused to steady. Court transcripts marked with annotations, phrases underlined in my late husband's hand, false testimony, fabrication, coerced signature. Letters from lawyers, some addressed to my in-laws, discussing strategies to contain her should I ever start asking questions. Photographs, my son shaking hands with the very man he swore he despised, my daughter-in-law smiling too broadly beside documents I was never shown. Each discovery split me open. Humiliation struck first. Every nod I had given, every smile I had forced while they built their narrative around me. Then came rage, sharp and clean, the kind that makes your teeth ache because your jaw is locked against screaming. Finally, betrayal. Heavy, suffocating. Betrayal is not a knife. It is a house collapsing while you stand inside it. I pressed a palm to my chest. The silence of the room felt violent. The clock ticked with a cruelty I hadn't noticed before. My breathing grew loud, desperate, like someone sprinting with nowhere to run. I wanted to fling the box across the room, yet I pulled it closer, as if destruction and preservation had fused into one unbearable instinct. I found my son's signature next. Familiar, looping letters, written with the same flourish he used when he signed birthday cards as a boy. But here, beneath legal language, his name was a blade. He had sided with them, ceded assets, confirmed lies, stood against me in writing. I traced the ink with a fingertip, remembering his small hand once slipping into mine as we crossed a street. That boy was gone. This man was a stranger. Flashbacks crashed over me. Family dinners where laughter hid transactions. A cousin suddenly favored. A decision made without me. Whispers that died when I entered the room. I remembered the time my husband leaned close at a gathering and murmured, "They're always testing loyalty. Remember that." I had smiled, thinking he meant business alliances. Now I saw he meant bloodlines. He had tried to warn me, and I, obedient, trusting, had nodded like a woman blindfolded. The more I read, the more the box transformed. No longer a container, it was a weapon. An arsenal of names, dates, betrayals, etched in ink. Every page was a match, and together they promised fire enough to burn the family tree down to blackened roots. But arsenals weigh heavy. Each truth I lifted pressed harder on my chest, until I wondered whether I could survive carrying it. I paused on a letter folded smaller than the rest. It was written in my husband's hand, but this one was not warning, it was confession. He admitted to bargains made to keep me protected, decisions designed to spare me pain that instead chained me in ignorance. He had been both my shield and my jailer. The words blurred as tears finally broke free. Love had lived beside deception all along, and I had mistaken silence for safety. Rage returned, fierce and unyielding. They had all known. My son, my in-laws, even my husband in his half-truths. They had known. And I had been kept pristine in my ignorance, like a doll set carefully on a shelf, too fragile to be trusted with reality. My whole life had been curated, stage-managed, until this box tipped the stage lights and exposed the painted backdrops. I pressed the photographs to my chest. My body shook. The paper edges dug into my skin, sharp as accusations. I whispered, "How could you?" Though I wasn't sure whether I was speaking to my husband, my son, or myself for believing in them. The silence closed in tighter, suffocating, until I opened the window just to hear the night air move. Somewhere a dog barked, ordinary and alive. Proof the world hadn't ended even though mine had cracked open. I laid everything out on the table. Letters in one line, transcripts stacked, photographs spread like evidence in a crime drama. It looked like a map of betrayal. My fingers hovered over each piece, unable to stop rearranging them, as if some new order might rewrite the story into something survivable. But every combination screamed the same truth. I was never meant to know. And yet now I did. My mind twisted back to gatherings I had once thought warm. My son, leaning into whispered conversations with his uncle. My daughter-in-law smiling too brightly when I asked questions. Even my daughter's occasional silences, heavy with knowledge she dared not say. They had all lived inside a story I wasn't invited to read. I was the audience, not the actor. But tonight, with the box open, I was no longer just the audience. The question loomed, what now? If I carried these papers into court, I could unravel their theater. The lies would collapse, and the truth, ugly, jagged, would glare in the light. But it would scorch everyone. My husband's memory, my son's reputation, even my own for being the woman who stayed quiet too long. Justice was not a clean victory. It was a fire that would consume. I folded my husband's first letter again and pressed it flat. His final words echoed, "Trust only what you hold in your hand." My hands held everything now, and the weight was unbearable. I closed my eyes, inhaled the paper dust air, and whispered to the empty room. They never thought I'd dare to speak. The silence after carried a pulse, like the house itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, I knew. The decision would not wait. Would I stay the woman they trained me to be, or would I let the truth burn through us all? The courthouse air was colder than I remembered, the kind that finds its way into your bones and lingers. I carried the box against my chest, both shield and torch, and as I pushed open the heavy double doors, heads turned. My footsteps echoed too loudly, like the world wanted everyone to hear I was coming. The man who had told me after, who had begged for my patience, met my eyes. His face drained of color. He knew. The judge rapped the gavel, summoning order, but the room had already begun to fracture. My son shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. My daughter, seated a few rows back, caught my gaze and gave the smallest nod. She didn't know what I held, but she knew it mattered. I set the box on the table before me. The sound of wood striking oak silenced whispers. A lawyer for the other side started to object, but my hands were already moving, sliding the lid open. Paper rustled like wings unfolding. "I submit new evidence," I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered so hard I thought it might shake the ceiling. Murmurs erupted. The judge leaned forward, skeptical. My son's pen slipped from his hand. I pulled out the first letter, my husband's, and read aloud. "If she is reading this, then they have already betrayed her." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The man who told me to wait stumbled to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Sit down," the judge snapped. For years, I had been the one told to sit down. Now the command was aimed at someone else, and the sound of it was sweeter than forgiveness. I laid the documents out one by one. Court transcripts with forged statements, letters between in-laws plotting strategy, photographs of secret meetings, every page a nail in the coffin of their illusion. My voice no longer trembled as I narrated, each word drawn from the marrow of years spent swallowing silence. "They said I wasn't ready to know," I told the room. "But the truth doesn't wait for permission. It burns, whether you look at it or not. My son rose suddenly, his face flushed. This is manipulation. She doesn't understand what she's reading? His words cracked with the desperation of a cornered man. He jabbed a finger toward me. She's always been naive, confused? The judge raised an eyebrow. His rage, his dismissal sounded too rehearsed, too practiced. Around us, relatives shifted uncomfortably. His outburst did more to convict him than any letter in the box. And then my daughter stood. Her voice carried across the courtroom, clear and sharp. She understands perfectly. You just never wanted her to. For a moment, time suspended. Mother and daughter, 2 generations of silenced women standing side by side. Her words lit a fuse in me. I was no longer standing alone. My son's face contorted, but every denial, every shout only painted him guiltier. He slammed his fist on the table, but it was the sound of a man watching the stage collapse beneath him. The lawyers scrambled, objecting, rephrasing, stalling. But the papers spoke louder. Each page I spread was a mirror, and no one liked their reflection. Even those who had feigned ignorance now avoided my eyes, afraid I'd hand them their own betrayal in black and white. The judge called for order again, his gavel sharp as thunder. But the damage was done. The courtroom, once carefully choreographed, had become chaos. The illusion was shattered, and I was the one who swung the hammer. I looked at the box. Hours ago, it had been a prison of secrets. Now it was my weapon, my victory. The forbidden turned into the undeniable, years of humiliation condensed into this moment of triumph. For so long, they had mistaken my silence for weakness. They didn't realize silence was my training ground. Every dismissal, every condescending chuckle, every closed door had taught me how to endure, how to wait, how to strike when it mattered. My silence had become strength. When the dust began to settle, I stood taller than I ever had in that room. The box no longer felt heavy. It felt like mine. Justice, I realized, isn't just a verdict. It's the act of reclaiming yourself after they tried to erase you. I saw my husband's words differently now. Yes, he had kept me in the dark, but he had also left me the key. Maybe he hadn't trusted me enough in life, but in death he had left me the choice. And I had chosen to speak. As I gathered the papers, I felt the eyes of the room on me, not the dismissive glance of an afterthought, but the weight reserved for someone impossible to ignore. I was no longer the invisible widow. I was the woman who forced the truth into the light. And if there was one thing I wanted anyone listening to remember, it was this. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, know this. Silence doesn't protect you. Your voice does. Subscribe for more stories like mine, where the truth finally breaks free.